I am conscious that weddings might be a sensitive subject right now. Three couples that I know have all postponed their weddings indefinitely, having previously planned to have got married last year and wanting to have that full celebration that the occasion of a marriage deserves. And their stories will be multiplied out across the country, across the world. There will be a backlog of weddings when we're once again able to gather in a crowd. I wonder even how many engagements are on hold, rings put to the back of drawers, waiting for a time when corks can pop and champagne be joyfully shared amongst family and friends. Weddings aside, I imagine that most of us, even the most introverted among us, and I count myself in that category, most of us are longing for a party, even if the wine ran out. The idea of being together freely, enjoying company and conversation, food and drink and laughter is a very valid longing in our lockdown state. Celebration at the moment is in short supply. So today, let's make the most of our imaginations. Let's travel there into the town of Cana a couple of millennia ago, to a party, to a wedding feast, where all the locals have gathered together, and many too from neighbouring towns and villages. Food is laid out, wine is being drunk, the happy couple are being toasted. Mary is here from down the road in Nazareth, and later on her adult son Jesus arrives with his newly formed group of friends. They are just getting to know one another. They are wondering what kind of movement they have found themselves drawn to in this compelling and enigmatic figure of Jesus. By the end of the wedding feast, they will have discovered so much more than they could have possibly imagined. This is a moment of epiphany for them. For when the crisis comes, when there is lack, when there is scarcity, when the wine runs out and the feast is in jeopardy, Jesus steps in and saves the day with an embarrassment of riches, the equivalent of over 1,000 bottles of the finest of wines, so much more than the feast could possibly consume. Well, the actual details of the wedding are sparsely given by John, so I'll leave you to imagine the sights and the sounds and the smells. You might later on want to transport yourself into that joyous occasion in your own meditations. But what John does share with us is like a very carefully crafted, luscious, multi-tiered wedding cake. There is layer upon layer of meaning. There is a rich palette of colour and of flavour. We won't indulge in all of it today, but here's a bit of a slice of that symbolism to give you a taste of the significance of this amazing story. Firstly, the timing of the wedding feast is important. John's Gospel opens with those famous words, "in the beginning," that take us all the way back to Genesis, to the creation story. He intentionally puts creation in our minds. And then the following episodes in the Gospel, including things like the baptism of Jesus, the calling of Nathanael that we looked at last week, and so on, they are punctuated by the phrase, "the next day." Now, the wedding at Cana is on the 7th of those days within the Gospel, and I don't think that's happenstance. I think that is deliberate. The 7th day in the creation story is the day of God's Sabbath rest. So this sign, the 7th day in the Gospel, is a sign that Jesus is inviting us all of creation, to enjoy the Sabbath rest. Not just putting up your feet on a Sunday in front of the telly, but to that rest, to that recreation that begins here and now and then continues on into eternity. That celebration that goes on forever. Well, more of that in a moment. But those of you who are listening or reading very carefully will have picked up that our reading actually began on the 3rd day, it says, on the 3rd day, perhaps referring to this being the 3rd day of the week. What does that remind us of, the 3rd day? Well, of course, on the 3rd day, Jesus will rise again from death. The 3rd day is Easter Sunday, it's resurrection, it's turning mourning into dancing, sorrow into joy, it's ushering in the new creation. So those two things, that it's the seventh episode in the Gospel, that it's on the third day, that timing of the story gives us clues about who Jesus is and what he has come to do. And then there's the jars that are filled with water, these stone jars. Must have been quite a feat to fill them. They weren't ordinary jars, but we're told that they were used for purification rites according to the Torah given by Moses. Back towards the start of the Gospel, we hear these words: the law was given through Moses, grace and truth through Jesus Christ. This water for ritual cleansing becomes, in Jesus' care, wine for celebration. Law is transformed into grace. So see what I mean about the layers? We could keep slicing away. There is so much symbolism in here. This was the first sign that Jesus performed, and it wasn't just a magic trick for the moment, but it pointed towards something much more meaningful, much more significant. And you might be thinking, well, so what? It's cleverly constructed. The sign reveals much more than first meets the eye about Jesus, about his nature. But what epiphany does this story bring me today? How might it transform me and the way in which I live? Last week, one of the images that we considered was that of the ladder, Jacob's ladder, that is then referenced again in the Gospel, dropping from heaven to earth, uniting the temporal and the eternal, the human and the divine, and how Jesus holds those states together, how our very ordinary lives are somehow connected with the extraordinary things of God. We can cut through from one world into the other. Well, today we have another picture of that union of the earthly and the heavenly. And that picture is not a ladder, but it's a picture of marriage. The responsibility for the wine, for the refreshments, would have been held by the bridegroom. And so when Jesus saves the day with the vast quantities of wine that are created, he is acting as though he is the bridegroom. And then in the next chapter, John the Baptist also identifies Jesus as a bridegroom. And as we know, Jesus regularly uses the imagery of a bridegroom in many of his parables as well, although in his time on earth we know that he didn't marry. This marriage is unlike any other. Jesus is the bridegroom, not just to a woman on earth, but to the church, the bride, that body of his followers who are invited to be forever wed to him in a faithful covenant of eternal love. That's what we hear about in our reading from Revelation. The book of Revelation is written at a time of great pain and suffering. You might relate to some of that. The writer is in an ultimate lockdown. He is in exile. The church is being brutally persecuted, and he writes about this battle against evil which is eventually crushed, and about the honouring of the martyrs who remain faithful to Christ. And then at the end, there is this wedding. Whether we are now single or partnered, if we are married or divorced or widowed, there is a cosmic wedding to end all weddings to which we're all invited to participate. We're all invited into union with God, who is love, and who will not let us down. And we're invited to that banquet that will never end, where the wine never even runs a little bit low. That idea of being the bride of Christ, of being invited to that banquet, might feel quite abstract, quite far off, difficult to imagine. I certainly find that. But that covenant starts in the here and now. It is as though we are engaged now, and so we're called to be in that faithful, loving relationship with Christ from today. And although we will fail, we will lose faith, we will have our attentions turned elsewhere, God nevertheless says, I will to us, and he keeps that promise. Marriages all have their flaws, all of them, because we are made for unconditional love, and only God can provide that. All of us, whoever we are, we long to be accepted fully, to be loved in our naked selves, to be loved without fear or shame. And that is what is on offer to us. Creation is good. The recreation is even greater. The old covenant of the law was foundational, that was essential, but the new covenant of grace sets us free. Marriage, here and now, can be beautiful, but the eternal union with Christ is beyond compare. And because we're held in that loving and secure and longed for relationship, it means that we can easily turn outwards and offer that abundance liberally to those around us who might be really scraping the barrel for some shreds of love. I'm going to close now, and I'm going to close with a blessing that is by the poet Jan Richardson. It's called Blessing the Water, the Wine. You thought you had earned to live, You thought you had learned to live with the empty, the hollow. You could place your ear against the rim of the vessel of your life and hear its ringing echo with equanimity, not expecting any more, not even bothered almost to be a bystander at the feast, if not delighting in the celebration, at least not despairing in it. When the water rushed into the emptiness, you were surprised that you could even feel the sudden wellspring when you thought all had been poured out. And then suddenly, the sweetness that stuns you, that tells you that this was not all, this was not the end, that this blessing was saving the best for last. So may you today taste the sweetness of that lavish love that Jesus has for you. May you know that it will never be depleted, it will never fail, and may you share it freely without holding back, being assured too that the best is yet to come.